Hello, I'm Rebecca the Maths Lady, here to help you become an expert primary maths teacher so that all your children become fluent, creative and confident with their maths. This is the 9th video in this series on teaching maths to children aged 6 to 7, and in this video I'm going to explain how we teach measure so that children become really confident and creative with their use of measure. In this video I'll be covering length, mass, capacity and temperature. And I'll be describing the kinds of activities that we want children to do at this level and that are really powerful, and the key insights and bits of understanding that we want children to develop. I won't be covering time and money. I'm going to cover those two topics in the next two videos. Right, let's get started by talking about where children should be with length, mass and capacity just now, and where they should be going this year. So last year they should have had some exposure to trying to measure length, mass and capacity, and they should have developed some of the language associated with those topics, and they should have explored the idea that you need consistent units of measure. So for example, if children are measuring the length of the classroom, they may measure it with their feet, putting one foot carefully in front of another, and they may come to understand that if a child has bigger feet, they're going to get a smaller measurement than if they've got smaller feet. So you start to develop with them an appreciation of the need for consistent units of measure that everybody uses. This year we're going to be recapping that, and we're going to start to use the standard units of measure. So for length, that's centimetres and metres. For mass, it's grams and kilograms. And for capacity, it's millilitres and litres. So for each of these topics, length, mass and capacity, it's best to start by having a conversation with the children about what they already know about these topics. And in that conversation, you want to draw out the need for consistent units of measure, and you want to ask children if they know any of the kinds of units of measure that are used. And if possible, it's a really great idea to have that conversation the school day before you actually start teaching that topic, because doing so will set their minds thinking, and they may well come back with more ideas the next day. And it'll also influence your thinking about the lesson that you're going to create for the children. And it makes it possible for them to influence what actually happens in the classroom, which can be a really positive and powerful thing. So for each of these topics, length, mass and capacity, you want to try and do 4 things. You want children to get some experience of measuring with the standard units and with standard equipment. You definitely want to do lots of estimating. You certainly want to compare different things against these measures. And as a teacher, you want to be modelling rich language like twice as and half as, and maybe you can look at your mixed numbers. You could say that's 2.5 meters. Even if the children aren't quite ready for that yet, it's great for them to hear you talking about it. So let's look at length first. We're trying to teach children to become familiar with centimeters and meters. Now here are a couple of meter sticks for measuring length. They're quite difficult to fit on this display, sorry about that, but quite quickly you can see that there's a particular problem. In this meter stick, this ruler, the numbers are in the spaces, and in this one they're more traditionally on the lines. And you need to be aware that this is a big problem for children starting to measure at this level. Should the numbers be in the spaces or should they be on the lines? Now, it's worth remembering that the main structure we've been using for number that relates to the meter stick is this one, the counting beads, and in this each object is an object. We don't have a scale, so it links much better to this type of ruler. In the way that I've set up this series, I haven't yet introduced the number line. I'm going to introduce that deliberately and carefully at the beginning of the next year of teaching. So children are very likely to struggle with rulers that have scales. People often send me products, and John Exton sent me this fabulous numeral this week, which has both numbers in spaces here for measuring like that and a scale. And that's a wonderful device for children to explore that'll help them whichever structure they're trying to use. And it's also quite good for addition and subtraction and counting in 2s and 5s and so on. Nobody ever pays me to promote their products. I wouldn't accept that, but I do accept free samples if you want to send me anything interesting. John has a numeral YouTube channel if you want to explore that one more. So if you're measuring in centimetres, just be aware how tricky it is. Having rulers with numbers in the gaps does get around that. We definitely also want to do work measuring with metre sticks. We can measure the length of the classroom, we can measure big things, and the children can set their metre sticks up end to end. That's great fun. And once the children have done some measuring, we want to do estimation in 2 ways. You can point something out and children can estimate its length and have a bit of a competition before they actually measure it. Or you can state a length and not give children rulers or measuring devices and ask them to mark out that length. It could be a length in metres in the yard with chalk, or it could be a length in centimetres with their hands. And you can have a competition to see who gets the closest. It's very, very powerful learning at this level. And then we definitely want to do work on comparison, and we should practice these symbols, the greater than, less than, and the equals symbols. We can have some laminated on cards and children can pick the right one to put in as they measure things and compare things. And it's worth revising this fact that the small end of the symbol goes with the smaller object. And finally, as I said, with your length, it's great for you to model and develop language such as twice as long, double the length, half the length, and to think about using language like that's about 2¼ meters and link across the work you've done on visualizing fractions to measure. So that's length. Your next topic is mass. And mass and weight are similar on Earth, but things with the same mass weigh different amounts if gravity is different. Your children don't need to be clear about that, but it's helpful if you as a teacher are. The mass is the potential for weight of an object, and the weight depends on gravity. So what are we going to use for measuring mass? Well, of course, there are balance scales, and these are hexagram weights, which are great for measuring small masses. We've got 1 gram, 5 gram, 10 gram, and 20 gram weights that can be used to puzzle out the weight of anything that's quite light. These weights and those balance scales are by Learning Resources. Remember, in this year, we're not really going above 100, so there's a kind of a gap in the weights that we're playing with. We're playing with very small weights up to 100 grams and weights in kilograms. So the gap is in the things that weigh 100 grams to 1,000 grams because we're not really weighing them. It's just useful to be aware of that. It can be an extension activity to try, but it's not core to the curriculum. Of course, it's also great to use weighing scales, but please don't miss out on using bathroom scales because we want children to become familiar and comfortable with kilograms. So in creating this video today, I didn't actually have a kilogram weight. So I've improvised. I've managed to find this bag of rice that's a kilogram. So children can pass this around and get a real sense of how much a kilogram is. Multisensorial experience, they can really feel it. So they can start to weigh different things in kilograms on the scales. They might weigh the chair, they might be comfortable weighing themselves. And then we can go through the same steps as before. First is measuring, and then second is estimating. 2 ways. If you give them something, can they estimate how many kilograms it's going to be? And if you give them a weight in kilograms, can they put together objects that are as close as possible to that many kilograms or grams? And we want to compare things with different masses, which has the greater mass, the smaller mass, and use those symbols again. And you want to be modelling rich language about number, such as double and half, and maybe some mixed numbers like 3½ kilograms, when the context is right and it's relevant to do that. And then our third key topic here is capacity. And again, we need to give children plenty of experience of measuring with measuring spoons. You might just want to focus on one, maybe a teaspoon of 5 millilitres, and link it into your counting in 5s. And also children need to learn to measure in litres. So you need some measuring jugs, possibly buckets with litre lines, and you want to do plenty of estimation, both ways, the kind of estimation where you show children a container and ask them to estimate its capacity, and where you give them a large container and ask them to put a litre of water in it and see how close they can get. And then there's the comparison, which is just wonderful with capacity. You want to find misleading containers. I've got some standard maths apparatus here. Which of those has the greater capacity and by how much? Well, it turns out that this one has double the capacity of that one, which is quite wonderful. But you can imagine how you could do this just with glasses or things you can find lying around your house to confuse children and really make them think about the space inside rather than just the height or the width of a container. So again, with capacity, it's learning to measure small and large capacities with millilitres and litres, lots of estimation, lots of comparison, and as a teacher, you can model some wonderful language that'll extend their understanding of number. With all of these types of measurement, you may start to use scales. Children have not yet been formally introduced to scales, usually in their maths teaching. So just do it for the exposure. Don't worry about testing them on using scales at all. Just have fun with it. It is good if they can see some scales at some stage, like with measuring jugs or with traditional rather than digital weighing scales. The final topic on the curriculum at this level is temperature, and this really just is a first introduction. We want to make sure that children have thought about temperature. They've thought about hotter temperature having larger numbers and colder temperature having smaller numbers, and that they've taken the time to think about when it's cold in their personal experience and when it's hot, and you've had some conversations about those. It's nice if they've seen some thermometers, both digital and thermometers with scales. I have already created a much more thorough video on teaching temperature for ages 7 to 11. Here's a link to that now if you're interested in knowing more about teaching temperature. But the main thing to be reassured about at this level is it's just about first exposure. Temperature hasn't been on the curriculum before. We just want to make sure that children have an idea of what it is and have some experience of having talked about it and thought about it, and that they know that thermometers are used to measure it. And they should also have come across the fact that temperature is measured in degrees. So it's nice to touch on 0 being freezing, where water turns to ice, and you can build up from there. But don't worry about it too much. They're going to be doing lots more on temperature going forward. So your takeaways from this video are that for length, mass and capacity, we want to recap the idea that units of measure always have to be the same size or it's going to get very confusing. And we want to introduce small and large units of measure. We want to start children off measuring things with those units of measure and with standard equipment. We want to do lots of estimation both ways, where children have to see something and estimate its length, capacity or mass, where they have to create things that have a given length, capacity or mass. We want to do comparisons, and we want to review our less than and greater than symbols and equal symbols. And as teachers, we want to use the opportunity to model more complex mathematical language like 2 1/4 when it's relevant and appropriate to do so. But most of all, we want to have lots of fun, lots of practical multisensorial experiences that will stay with children so they have a good foundational understanding of measure that everything in the future will hook into. And we also want to introduce a little bit about measuring temperature for the first time. But we need to be careful about measuring with scales because children are going to find that difficult. Don't worry about it, just do a little bit of it and don't make too big a deal about it. We'll come back to that in the future. Hope you find this video useful. If you have any questions or comments, please do put them in the comments below. If you want to ask me things in more detail, you come to my live streams, which are 9 o'clock Sundays British time. If you've not subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe so that you can find it again. If you want to see a full list of all my videos, please go to www.authenticmaths.co.uk/videos. And if you've time to tell anyone else who you think would find these videos useful about them, I'd be hugely grateful. Thank you so much for watching and for investing your time in working to become an absolutely fantastic maths teacher who'll help raise an awesome generation of mathematicians, which is what this world needs. Hope to see you again soon for the next video in this series, which will be about time. Bye for now.